Many people dream about the chance of getting to live in Alaska, and few will actually get the opportunity to make that a reality. If you're on your way to Alaska or you're just starting your dream, I hope today's video will help you understand some of the obstacles that you might encounter on your way to Alaska and understand some of the hidden costs that you'll incur once you actually live here. When I moved to Alaska, I was fortunate enough that I was able to come up via ferry from Washington to Whittier. But as of right now, and until further notice, the Alaska Marine Highway System has suspended all cross-Gulf travel. So you're unable to take the ferry from Washington into mainland Alaska. Now, you can still take the ferry from Washington to Juneau, Skagway, Haines, places like that, but those won't actually get you into the interior of Alaska because there are no road systems that go from those locations into the interior. If you're still determined to take the ferry, let me give you a breakdown of some of the costs that you're going to be looking at. The most important thing to understand is that when you're boarding the ferry with a vehicle, that you are going to be charged per foot of length of vehicle. So if you're towing a vehicle, you're going to add the length of your main vehicle and your towed vehicle together to get the total accumulative length. And that's how they're going to charge you. But let's assume that you're just driving a vehicle and not towing anything, and the average car length is 15 feet. Since I can't get accurate pricing to go across the Gulf of Alaska right now, since they've suspended that program, I'm going to give you what the cost is to go from Bellingham, Washington, which is the only place you can get on the ferry in the lower 48, and we're going to take that into Juneau. To go from Bellingham to Juneau with a 15-foot vehicle is going to cost you roughly $1,100. If you go further into Alaska, say Haines, we're going to add another $100 for that same length of vehicle. The longer the vehicle, the more expensive it's going to get. The increase in price is roughly $10 per foot of overall length in vehicle as you increase above 15 feet. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that you yourself are going to have to pay for your passage on the ferry. An adult over 18 years of age is going to be charged roughly $450 for passage. Seniors are slightly less than that, and children ages 6 to 11 are roughly half that cost, while children under the age of 5 are allowed to board the ferry free of charge. So for every adult, let's just assume that it's $450 approximately. Then we also need to think about sleeping accommodations. Now, you can sleep on the deck and in several of the lounges on the ferry free of charge. However, if sleeping in a tent on the deck of the ship or in a chair in one of the lounges is not your cup of tea, then you can always rent a cabin on the ferry. Those cabins are going to range anywhere from $135 all the way up to close to $800 for this particular destination. The further you go into Alaska, say if you want to go to Haines, Skagway, or eventually into the interior, it's going to cost you more to rent the same cabin, depending upon how far into Alaska your destination is. Do keep in mind that travel across the Gulf of Alaska is approximately 5 days in length. And during that time, your pet, which are charged $40 per pet, are required to stay in the vehicle. You yourself cannot stay in your vehicle, nor can you gain access to your vehicle at your will. You're only allowed onto the car deck 4 times a day for a maximum of 15 minutes. If you have pets, that's the time that you're going to take your pet out of the vehicle and allow them to get a little bit of exercise and to do their business. Also, it's important to note that all animals, all dogs, are allowed out of their vehicles or carry-on containers at that point and only at that point 4 times a day with all other animals. So if you have an animal who is not dog friendly, just keep in mind that all the dogs are out at once and they're all going to the same area of the car deck to do their business, and you're required to clean up after your pet each and every incident. So for a dog to stay in a vehicle or in a carrier for 5 days with only 4 times a day being allowed to get out of that vehicle for only 15 minutes at a time may not be something that you're willing to deal with. Oh, and did I mention that your pets are going to have to be vaccinated and receive a health certificate from your veterinarian, a printed health certificate from your veterinarian, in order to get on the ferry and enter into Alaska. The moment you board the ferry and it departs from Bellingham, Washington, you are considered to be in Alaska. And so you are going to need to have them updated on their vaccinations, including rabies, and have that printed health certificate from your veterinarian that you have obtained within the last 30 days prior to boarding. You're going to need that whether you go across the border into Canada or you fly into Alaska with your pet. No animal is allowed to enter the state of Alaska without having these items. So these are things that you need to keep in mind. Now, my reason for taking the ferry was so that I could travel with my firearms and ammunition. So if you're traveling with firearms and ammunition, do realize that you have to declare each of those. Your ammunition and your firearms have to be stored separately from each other and in a locked container. Now, that locked container can be your vehicle, and you're only allowed to travel with so much ammunition. These are things that you need to keep in mind when considering traveling on the ferry into Alaska. But as I mentioned, as of right now, travel across the Gulf of Alaska has been suspended due to a shortage of employees. They do not have enough people to man the ferry to go across the Gulf of Alaska. So who knows if that'll ever resume, but right now that is not an option. So let's talk about what some of your other options are. Now, another popular choice for moving to Alaska is to cross the Canadian border and then back across the border into the United States once you reach Alaska. This, however, does not come without its own set of issues. The first issue that you're going to run into is one that I've already mentioned, which is that your animals are going to have their current vaccinations, including rabies, and an updated health certificate that was issued in the past 30 days prior to your move. The other issue that you're going to run into is that the vehicle that you're driving needs to be registered to you, unless that is a rental vehicle, in which case you need to have the proper documentation to say that it's been leased to you for the purpose of moving into Alaska. When driving through Canada, you have the option of taking 2 different routes out of the state of Washington up to Alaska. If you take the Cassiar Highway, be warned that that highway is gravel for the most part, and that you're going to be traveling through some pretty desolate areas of Canada where you might have difficulty in finding hotel accommodations and fuel. When taking the Cassiar Highway, which can save you a couple of hours, you might actually lose those hours of savings because you're more likely to encounter car trouble along the way due to the rough nature of the road. Regardless whether you take the Cassiar or you take Highway 92 out of Washington up towards Alaska, you're going to want to make sure that you have tires with good tread on them, that you carry extra fuel cans, and that you plan accordingly. Because once you enter Canada and they know that you are making your way to Alaska, they're only going to give you a certain number of days to get through the country and back into the United States. During COVID, that was 3 to 5 days. I believe typically, though, that you have 7 days to make your way across Canada and into Alaska. And then there's always the issue of firearms again. A lot of people do like to travel with their firearms, either for protection or just because they're moving and they want to bring those firearms with them. Well, Canada has a very strict firearms policy, and you most likely are not going to be able to bring your firearms into the country. And so the best bet for you there is to ship your firearms through an FFL. The FFL in Alaska that will be receiving your firearms in the area in which you're moving may have only certain other FFLs that they like to work with. And so it's recommended that you call that FFL directly here in Alaska and find out who they recommend in your state to ship your firearms up to Alaska. Then you're going to incur fees of the transfer fee from the original FFL, the shipping fee from the carrier, UPS, FedEx, whoever it might be, and then the receiving fee from the FFL here in Alaska. Now, they can ship both your firearms and your ammunition. So that is the way that I recommend going as far as getting your firearms up to the state of Alaska. And then your last choice, of course, is going to be to fly up to Alaska. If you're flying to Alaska, chances are you're not going to have much of your possessions, if any, with you. So how do you get your belongings up here? Well, you could have them transported with a transport company, a moving company, if you will. Two that I have familiarity with is Span Alaska and Linden Transport Services. Both of those can get your items up here and transport them through the state of Alaska. They do work a little bit differently from one another, so I recommend that you do your research and figure out what transport company works best for your needs. The other thing about using a transport company is that even though they can get your items up here, they might not be able to deliver your items to your door. You have to have access for them to get down your driveway or down the road which you live on, and that might be an issue if you're living remotely. The other thing is you could also use a company like Pods or U-Haul shipping pods, and those companies typically are going to transport your items up in the pods to their hub in Alaska, and then if you live close enough to the hub, they will deliver them for a fee to your doorstep. However, if you're living remotely several hours away from where the hubs are located, they're not going to deliver those to you, and you're going to be responsible for picking up your items from their storage lot and transporting them back to your property. So your other option is also to get a shipping container and have that filled and then have that shipped up to Alaska. And then typically those can deliver just about anywhere, and you can have that dropped right off at your doorstep. That is the way that I would recommend going over the transport companies, or using a moving service such as Johnson's Moving, what have you, or using the pods. The shipping containers really are the way to go. A couple other things that you might want to think about before ever planning your move to Alaska is, where are you going to be located, and what is that going to mean for your health? If you ever need medical attention, it will take time for the emergency services to reach you. Now, if you need to be transported to a major hospital in Anchorage or Fairbanks, chances are that they were going to life flight you there. Those costs of taking a helicopter or a plane ride into Anchorage or Fairbanks can be quite expensive, but there is an option, and that is getting insurance through Guardian or LifeMed, which LifeMed, you can get your whole family covered for around $50 annually, and it'll cover all your transportation costs to the hospital. So that is something that I highly recommend. Now, one other thing that I want people to think about before ever planning a move to Alaska is your mental health. If you are somebody who is prone to depression, I don't recommend that you move here. You might be aware that the days in Alaska in wintertime are very short, limited to about 4 to 5 hours, depending upon where you're situated in the state. Here it is the second week in February, and the sun is just barely making its way over the treetops. For much of the winter, the sun barely makes it over the horizon, and even in the summertime, it's rather cold here. Many days are rainy or overcast, and therefore your vitamin D levels might decrease living here, and that is something that can also be a contributing factor to depression. So if you're prone to depression, I don't think that this is a wise location for you, for many reasons outside of just the weather. There's also the fact that if you're going to be living remotely and you're a social creature, your social interactions are going to decrease dramatically. So keep that in mind when planning a move up here as well. And then beyond that, if you are the type of person who gets upset easily at the slightest little thing, again, this is not some place that I recommend that you move to, because things happen all the time that are outside of your control, and you just never know what's going to happen.
No matter where you live, things will go wrong. But when you live remotely, you can't let it get you down, because things are more likely to go wrong than they are right sometimes. Sometimes you take every precaution to prevent things from happening, and they still do. Take, for example, my vehicle. It has a brand new battery in it that has been plugged into a battery trickler on a battery warmer. The oil pan and transmission are on a warmer as well. And yet, it's dead in the water. It won't start. Chances are it's just a solenoid, but I won't know until I get underneath the hood and look at it. Other times you prepare, planning for the worst to happen, and nothing comes of it, such as the most recent storm that came through that was supposed to drop upwards of 50 inches of snow, and I got about half of that snow, and nothing else came out of the storm. No power outages or any other incidents, luckily. The point I'm trying to make, though, is you never know what's going to come your way when you're living remotely, and you need to be able to roll with it, whether it's good or bad, because there isn't much you can do about it sometimes.
While I'm on the topic of mental health, the other thing that really needs to be considered before moving to Alaska is to make sure that everyone in your party is fully on board with the idea of living this lifestyle. Not only living in Alaska, as I mentioned, it can be rather extreme here as far as the weather is concerned, but also living a remote lifestyle, and especially if you're planning on going off grid. It is not an easy lifestyle at all. There are tasks that take on a whole new meaning, such as doing dishes when you're doing them without running water in your cabin, or having to collect water, whether it's from a local well or you're heading off to the spring to collect water year round. All of these things can wear one down, from bringing in firewood, cutting the firewood as I talked about in my last video, to dealing with the car issues that I showed earlier. So no matter what you decide to do, whether you plan to move to Alaska or you're planning to move to another area of the country or world and live an off-grid remote lifestyle, just keep that in mind, that you need to make sure that everybody in your family and in your party is willing to take on the burden of living this type of a lifestyle. I've seen way too many people come up here thinking that everybody was going to enjoy this lifestyle, only to find out that it didn't really work, and now they're having to rethink their plans. As I've mentioned in the last video and this one, it can be rather costly just to get here, and the last thing you want it to cost you is your relationships with your loved ones. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close out this video, but I did want to just let everybody know that I really appreciate you watching these videos. I hope that if you're planning a move to Alaska yourself, that it turns out to be the most wonderful decision you've ever made. I hope that these videos were a help to you in your journey up here. And until I see you the next time, please stay safe and take care. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.